These are the new metal releases for October 4th, 2024. I have 7 albums to talk about. I decided to go bigger for this episode as I didn't do any standalone reviews this weekend. I have some glam metal, some cosmic death metal, some power metal, some more old school death metal, some groove metal, some industrial, a nice mix of genres this time. So let me get into it. The first band I have is called D.A.D, and the album is called Speed of Darkness. This is a Danish rock band that used to go under the name Disneyland After Dark, but they changed their name to D.A.D to avoid legal problems, allegedly. They've been around since the early 80s, although I've never listened to them before. They have an extensive discography. This new album has 14 songs, so let's talk about a few of them. They released a few singles. One is Keep That Mother Down. It sounds like the glam of the 80s with the raspy vocals and the big sing-along chorus. There was a melodic guitar solo, and they had another single called Head Over Heels. This didn't sound like a typical glam rock power ballad of the 80s, though. It sounded more like adult contemporary roots rock with a little bit of a reggae influence, so I thought that was pretty cool. There was another single called The Ghost, and that one reminded me a little of modern-day Bon Jovi. It was a little bit of glam metal, but also a little bit of that adult contemporary sound. Then there was another single called First, Second, Third that sounded more like the sleaze metal of the 80s, maybe something like Dangerous Toys. Then there was a song that opens the album called God Praise to Man. This sounds like the glam rock of the 70s with a classic rock and roll rhythm guitar. Then another song called Speed of Darkness, which had some heavier riffs in the intro, but the verse section sounded more like the bluesy glam metal of the 80s. Then another album cut that reminded me of some classic Aerosmith. Overall, not too bad. The album had some variety on it. It didn't sound just like a generic glam metal album. They had influences from different genres. So most of it was just fun, upbeat rock and roll, good to listen to when you're at a party. It's kind of a metal album that's accessible for everybody, but also heavy enough for the typical Gen X metalheads who grew up with Bon Jovi and Poison. So probably targeted more for a Gen X audience. But with that being said, I will give this an 8 out of 10. It's a fun album to listen to if you just want some fun rock and roll. Next I have Blood Incantation with Absolute Elsewhere. This is a death metal band from Denver, Colorado. This band is very unique. They blend death metal and psychedelic space rock. The album has 2 songs that are 20 minutes long each, and these are epic death metal songs and space rock songs with these different sections, kind of like these old progressive rock bands, similar to like Rush they used to do on their albums. Now, the first song is called Stargate. This was released prior to the release of the album, so pretty much half of the album was out already. And it's divided into 3 parts. They're called Tablet 1, Tablet 2, Tablet 3. The first part sounds like some old school death metal, and then after 2 minutes it goes into this psychedelic space rock section. There's some trippy keyboard sounds. Kind of reminded me of Pink Floyd's either Shine on You Crazy Diamond or Welcome to the Machine. And there's even like a David Gilmour style guitar solo. Then they transition back to death metal. Some parts reminded me of classic thrash as well. And then with Tablet 2, there's more trippy space rock. Then you get heavy again with some progressive death metal on Tablet 3. Then the second song called The Message. Again, they divided it up into 3 parts. Each part called Tablet 1, 2, and 3. The first tablet sounds like some progressive death metal. Lots of tempo changes. I felt it sounded more like slam death metal, similar to a band like Suffocation. But then there were parts that sounded more like new wave goth, or maybe just what I gathered from the bass guitar. There's also a part of the song that sounded like black metal. And then you get to Tablet 2, and this is when things get very proggy again. And it sounded like some King Crimson or Yes, but with death metal guitars added to the sound. This part of the song has lots of slow and trippy sections. Then it starts to sound like Pink Floyd again. There's part of the song where it sounds like they're doing some chanting as part of a weird cosmic psychedelic ritual. And then Tablet 3 is an 11-minute track and it brings back the brutal death metal sound with the deep gutturals. But they also incorporate other genres of metal into the sound. So I heard a few riffs that sounded like some Merciful Fate or something like that. But they also have some trippy parts here as well, and it's not just 11 minutes of death metal. Now, I probably could have done a standalone review of this, but I decided just to do a condensed version for this video, which is kind of long enough in itself. I know a lot of other channels reviewed this, so that's why I kind of didn't go the standalone route. But I agree with all the other reviewers. One of the best metal albums of the year. So this is going to get a 9 out of 10. I think they made a masterpiece, and they're blending genres that usually don't go together. So this will definitely be one of my end of the year lists, one of the best metal albums of the year. Next is Wind Rose, and the album is called Trollslayer. This is an Italian power metal and folk metal band. Songs inspired by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I reviewed their last album in 2022 called Warfront, so I've been listening to this band for a while now. This new album has 9 songs. They have a single called Great Feast Underground, one of those folk metal drinking songs. It reminded me of something like the band Ailstorm would write. Then another single, To Be a Dwarf. This one had a folk metal sound, but more of a guitar-centric sound. And then the other single, Rock and Stone, sounded more like traditional folk metal with some power metal influence. Now, as for the album tracks, you have the opening track called Of Ice and Blood. It's a classical-sounding introduction instrumental that has a folk rock vibe. Then they go into Dance of the Axis, which sounds more like their typical sound. There are pounding drums. Music that sounds like power metal, although they get pretty heavy on this track. This is one of those tracks that kind of sounds like the dwarves are getting ready to go into battle. There's just some fun power and folk metal. It evokes images of fantasy-inspired battle scenes. The drumming is very powerful, and the guitars play these Renaissance fair-styled melodies. And then there's another song called Home of the Twilight. This one has a faster rhythm, more of a power metal sound. The drums are very fast-paced, and the song is more along the lines of one of those getting ready for battle types of songs. Then another battle song called Trollslayer, which has more of those fantasy-inspired keyboards and medieval melodies, but they also got pretty heavy on this as well. Another one of those battle songs, and had more of an aggressive tone. The guitar sounded a little harder, and you could also hear keyboards in the background. Then there was a song called Legacy of the Forge. It sounded like a typical folk metal, or the kind of music you would hear in a video game like a Legend of Zelda or something like that, or anything of that nature. Other words, it had more of an accessible sound. Overall, the band is very consistent. They don't really experiment with the sound. You know what you're getting. So I'm going to give this album 7.5 out of 10. It's a fun album if you like power metal or folk metal or any of that type of thing with dwarves and stuff. The next band I have is Undeath, and the album is called More Insane. This is a death metal band from Rochester, New York. Part of the new wave of old school death metal, if you want to call it that. I reviewed their last album called It's Time to Rise from the Grave back in 2022. It's a short death metal album, 10 songs, 33 minutes long. Basically some old school death metal. There are lots of old school style guitar riffs, very similar to bands like Cannibal Corpse or even like Obituary. They had deep guttural vocals, powerful drumming. So the opening track is called Dead from Beyond. This is just some straightforward death metal and some pretty cool lead guitar work. Next track is called More Insane, and then the title track has one of those circular buzzsaw style guitar riffs, very fast-paced and brutal. I heard more vocal variety on here with some deep gutturals and more of those higher pitched death metal style vocals. Then a song called Brandish the Blade. This one had more of that traditional death metal. It gets very intense. Then there is Disputatious Malignancy. And it's more of that old school death metal, but there's a little bit of a groove in the sound, and they change tempos often to keep things interesting. The guitar solo was very intense and creates a whirlwind of sound. Then we have Sutured for War, and this one actually sounded a little bit like heavy metal at first, but then went full death metal. This song evoked a feeling of being chased by this big creature, even though I know it's about the horrors of war. Then there was a song called Cramped Caskets. And this is more of that classic death metal sound from the late 80s, early 90s. And on this one, I really like the guitar sound because they kind of evoke these feelings of horror and dread. And the vocals, when they're being delivered, you can imagine some type of axe-wielding maniac. And then they have a song called Bounty Hunter that has a slower pace, just heavy, very heavy as anything else. and also heard some Cannibal Corpse vibes in this one. Overall, it's an old school death metal. You're not getting anything else. You don't experiment or change the sound. The band is very consistent. I give this 8 out of 10. I think the best track was Bounty Hunter. It just had that slower pace and it let them explore different types of moods. So I recommend this album if you are a fan of death metal. So I have some more death metal, and this band is called Maul, and the album is called In the Jaws of Bereavement. So they are on the 20 Buck Spin label. This is their second full-length album. My first time listening to the band, and they're from Fargo, North Dakota. So the album has 10 songs, and it's 38 minutes long. So this might be a little similar to the band I just talked about called Undeath, but there are some aspects of the sound that kind of sets them apart. So I think in general, the music was a little slower paced, more along the lines of a band like Obituary, and there were lots of different layers of sound in the songs. They're very brutal. The vocals are deep gutturals. There are tons of guitar riffs on the album. The album opens with the title track. This one has lots of that guitar chugging along with thick layers of sound. Then there is Blood Quantum, and this picks up the pace a little bit more technical than the first song. The guitar playing had lots of harmonics, and the vocals were in that low, aggressive style. I also like the bass guitar in this song. Then there was a song called Weaving Cerebral Horrors. This was another slower paced track with some pounding guitar riffs. Sounded like the guitarists were giving someone a beat down, and then they mixed in some of those old school tremolo picked riffs in the mix. There was a song called Spontaneous Stigmata. It had more of that galloping sound and powerful drum beat. This one had a lot more energy, but they didn't go too fast as they kept it at a moderate speed. In the middle of the album is a song called Alluring Deceit. It started with the clean guitars, and I'm thinking it's going to be one of those interludes, but it's another death metal song, but it was slower, had a very demented sound, kind of like being performed by some type of zombie that just rose from the dead. Sound was very thick and atmospheric. Then there was a song called Midwest Death. This one moved pretty slow, but had really big riffs. And another one that just evokes feelings of this giant monster coming to destroy a city. Lots of chugging guitars, low guttural vocals. And I think that was my favorite song in the album. It's just one of those songs that captures the death metal that's very sick, vile, disgusting, but in a good way. And then there's a song called Unbridled Delusions, and probably had some of the best guitar riffs. It wasn't super fast, but the riffs were really cool, even though they picked up the pace when the song progressed. Overall, I like this one better than the Undeath album, but not as much as the Blood Incantation album. So this one gets the silver medal in death metal for the week. I'm giving it 8.5 out of 10. If you like more speed and aggression, I would say check out the Undeath album. But if you don't mind the slower tempos in your death metal, check out this album. The next band that I have is called Transport League, and the name of the album is We Are Satan's People. This is a Swedish groove, sludge, doom metal band. They formed back in 1994. This is their 10th full-length album. This is also my first time listening to them. The album has 11 songs. It's 45 minutes long. This band has a very 90s type of sound. I think they tune their guitars to drop D. Sounds like the guitar riffs are played in that tuning. Now, if I'm wrong, I might be wrong. But that's what it sounds like. They claim to be influenced by bands like Pantera or Prong and a couple others. They have the sludge and groove element to their sound. I heard a little bit of a Mastodon in their sound, but I think it's still more 90s oriented. They have a song called Unkill Crash. It starts with the electronic drum beat. It has some sound samples. It made me think of like Rob Zombie. Then a song called Hallowed Victory, which had more of groove and industrial. Then a song called Bodies Recede, which had some of the stop-start riffs, something along the lines of either Prong or Helmet. Then a song called Cosmo Death with some slower and heavier grooves. The album's not too bad. They're hard to pinpoint into one subgenre, but it sounds very 90s to me. That's what I get from it. So my score is going to be 7.5 out of 10. Just fun, headbanging music. And if you like metal, if you like the 90s, you can check it out. The last band I have is called Warm Gadget. The name of the album is Sorrows. This is an American industrial band. This is their second full-length album and their first in 10 years. So they are similar to bands like Nine Inch Nails, Rammstein, Rob Zombie. The album is fairly short because there are 9 songs, but it's actually 6 songs because the last 3 are remixes. The opening track is called The Masses. It's very early 2000s, industrial, something like Static X, although I found the vocals mixed very low. The next song is called Debutante. This one features Paige Hamilton from Helmet. Kind of sounds more like a Helmet song because they have both the screamed vocals in the verse and the cleaner vocals in the chorus, so that's what it reminded me of. Also one of the songs that has a remix on the second part of the album. Then the next song is called Like Bats. This one starts off with a very dark and haunting sound, almost like you're walking into some abandoned psychiatric facility. But once the song takes off, it reminds me more of the band Korn. I thought the vocals sounded more like Jonathan Davis. They continue with this industrial sound on the next song called Annoyed. Then a song called Digging, which sounded more like that 90s industrial sound, something along the lines of Ministry with sound samples and a fast industrial drum beat. Then a song called Unfollow, which had an electronic drum beat, maybe something similar to Nine Inch Nails. And the last song was Creep on the Inside, which is very darker, more industrial, kind of sounded like 2000s nu metal, but it was pretty cool. So overall, it's not too bad. It's just industrial music. My score is going to be a 7 out of 10. I think it's a good album. If you like this type of thing, 90s industrial, 9 Inch Nails, some nu metal, some Ministry, that type of thing. Last week's episode, Nu Metal, releases September 27, 2024. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please give this video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe. If you have not already, I do rock and metal reviews. I do rankings, classic album reviews, tier lists, all stuff like that. I have channel memberships. Check the video description for my socials and all that. So I will see you in the next one.